Magnus Carlsen absolutely destroyed Jan-Krzysztof Duda yesterday, and I just had to show you this game, so I'm hitting pause on my Ali Reza vs Chucky series. I'll link that playlist at the end for anyone who wants to catch up and carry it on tomorrow. So this was an online game. It was played in the Charity Cup, which was raising money for what's going on in Ukraine, and it was online. This is the final. Magnus went on to win the event, and this was for me his most exceptional game on the route to victory. So he has black here. Jan-Krzysztof kicks off with pawn to e4. Magnus goes for the Sicilian defense. We have these opening moves, and bishop b5 starts off this Rossolimo variation. Now there are many ways to play for black. Magnus adopts pawn to g6. We have castles from white, bishop g7, and now pawn c3, a very straightforward way of playing, preparing to set up the big centre. Black now goes knight to f6. We had rook e1 defending the pawn, black castles, and d4 sets up the centre. Now Magnus strikes back with pawn to d5. This is the principled way to play. You let white kick on to e5, but then your knight finds this square on e4, and the old way to play here was actually going knight b to d2, immediately challenging that knight, but this is one of the reasons the line actually went kind of out of favour. This is what Peter Lecco and Danny King were talking about on their stream, because after this captures here, white wasn't getting really anywhere in terms of proving an advantage. But more recently, somewhere around 2 to 3 years ago, people started playing bishop to e3, and this revived the line because now white is doing quite well. Excuse me. So after bishop to e3, we had pawn takes on d4, the pawn recaptured here, and now the queen came to b6. And we're actually following the game of Calrsen versus Caruana from Vaikanze a couple of months ago. Calrsen won a beautiful game, exchange sack. In that one, Caruana went queen to e2, defending the bishop. We had bishop d7 and so on. But in this game, we had simply takes on c6. So Calrsen recaptures, and now this knight came back to d2, not the other one, because you want to reserve this knight to come to the c3 square in a lot of variations. You also now clear the way for the f-pawn to come to f3. So now we had bishop to e6, and it might look weird sticking it there, staring at its own pawn, but if there's an exchange here, pawn recaptures, then that bishop comes to life on the d5 square. And now in this exact position, we reached it in the Navarra versus Pragnananda game in this same tournament. And there Navarra went pawn to f3. We had captures, rook f to c8, the game went on to be a draw. But here Duda played more ambitiously. So instead of pushing f3 immediately, he went knight to b3. And now he's asking black a really pertinent question: where is your knight actually going? Because it's got no jumps, as we can see, and f3 is coming. Well, here's Carlsen's point. He just goes pawn to f5. This is really deep prep, awesome stuff. So the knight gets kicked, pawn to f3, and here Carlsen just leaves it on that square. He goes pawn f4. Now if you take that knight, well, we're taking back here. Black's doing well, they've got the bishop pair, even though they're a pawn down, they're going to get a big attack. So we didn't have this one. The bishop drops back to c1 here, and now once again Magnus leaves that piece on prise. He goes rook a to d8 here, again anticipating the opening of this d file after the captures. Now once again Duda doesn't take the piece. If he did, we'd have pawn recaptures, let's say knight c3, well, pawn e3 is the follow-up. You're locking in this white squared bishop, which then locks in the rook, and in the meantime black's going to get a big attack. So we didn't have that immediate captures. Instead, in this position, we had queen to e2 from Duda. So now he is threatening to take. But here's Magnus's point. He now goes knight to g5. Again, very, very deep stuff. He's provoking this h4 move, which Duda plays. Now you don't retreat passively to f7, of course. Then you also lose the f4 pawn. So it comes back to e4. What's going on? Why is Magnus wasting this tempo? Well, he's claiming that h4 is now a weakness. It's going to help him attack the king later on. So here Duda takes the plunge. He does take the piece. He doesn't have so many other great moves. And now Magnus recaptures, and Duda dives in with the queen here, but best would have been knight to c3, because now when black kicks on with pawn e3, you can actually give back the piece. We could have a line like this, and although white is a pawn up, black has good compensation with the bishop pair. It's actually possible to immediately win the pawn back with something along these lines. But okay, Duda didn't play this knight out to c3. Again, he's playing a bit more ambitiously. He takes the pawn, he doesn't want to give back the piece. But this is actually a blunder. Now Magnus's best move in this position was actually pawn to f3. Really tricky stuff. There's a threat to go f2 check here, and that's why if you take the queen, we follow up with this Zwischenzug. Black is doing very well. And if you take this pawn here, well, now bishop d5. After the queen goes somewhere, the rook is coming through, the whole thing's falling apart. So that would have been more precise, but bishop d5, still good. The bishop comes to d3, now f3 comes, but here's the key difference in the variations. Now there's the defensive move, bishop to e3. You can't go f2 check anymore, or we'll simply capture that one. So instead the pawn captured on g2. Black's still doing well here. It's really hard for white to actually unravel the queenside rather, and bring these pieces to the defense. So the knight came to d2 now developing, and here's what you need to understand about the position. This pawn is creating checkmating threats. So Magnus wants to bring his queen in like this and deliver a mate. Of course the f-file is open as well. So that explains queen e6. Bishop to f2 now played. Not the best move, but it does open up the queen to laterally defend the h3 square, also protects this pawn. And so a much better way to play for Magnus here would have been takes on f2. Now when the king recaptures, queen g4 comes with a lot more potency, because you're threatening to take here now. You can't go queen g3, or this rook joins the party. That's devastating. So white would be in quite a bit of trouble trying to defend here. But Magnus didn't take on f2, he went rook f3 instead, and here Duda had a chance to come back into the game. So what he should play in this position is knight takes on f3. Now I imagine he got spooked by this, because now the queen could come to h3, looks like you're getting mated, but white has this resource of bishop g3 to give the king a square on f2. Now you do give the piece back, but then knight beats d2 can come. You're starting to slightly consolidate. The computer actually gives this position as level, should be a draw by some kind of perpetual soon, but okay, anything could happen, still very wild. But Duda didn't take with the knight, he took with the queen instead. He didn't want to allow queen h3, but this does of course mean you're giving your queen now. So the knight recaptured, and the compensation just isn't quite there, because after queen h3, threatening mate, Duda's whole idea was knight h2 to block out that queen, but now bishop h6 is an excellent follow-up. You're coming onto these dark squares, and critically you want to come to f4 and deliver a mate down here. That's the whole idea. So rook e4 stops that bishop move. This rook came to the f-file, and now this bishop's actually paralysed. You can see black wants to take it, but it can't go here, can't come to e3, the bishop controls the square, it can't drop back, or the stuff going on down on f1. So all Duda can do here is develop his other rook, but now can you see how Magnus comes crashing through? And if you're enjoying this video, do hit that like button and let me know, and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already done so. So here Magnus crashes through, rook takes on f2, what else? The king recaptures, and now the queen can pick up here, and the big problem for white is although you've got two rooks for the queen, the king is just way too exposed here. So rook g1 played, the queen nudged back to h3. Now be careful, there's a threat to go queen f5 check and pick up your rook. So it drops back here, and now an excellent move for Magnus. He wants to take on h4 with check and then also collect on d4, but that knight is holding the pawn. So a5 played, and you can't meet it with a4 or then your knight's unprotected. So the rook took here on g2, a4 from Magnus. After the knight retreated, then he collects here with check and also wins a second pawn. Really tough for white now. Knight f3 tries to defend the king. The queen centralised to d5. Look at that amazing square. Hits the knight. That was defended. And now Magnus just simply collects on a2. There's nothing to fear from a white attack, because although rook c2 comes, threatening a check here, the king is perfectly safe. So the queen re-centralizes, we head check down here, king g7, king g2, protects this knight, frees up this rook for action, but now simply queen e4 played, a really nice creeping move. You're threatening queen g4 check, watch out for loose pieces, they drop off the board. So this rook defended its brother, now this check came anyway, king f2, bishop f4, the rook came here, overprotecting the knight, and now a very simple finish. Check here, the king moved away, and Magnus collected here, Duda resigns. The whole thing's gone. Say you take this minor piece off, well, you're simply 4 pawns up here. It's completely overwhelming. Amazing game from Magnus. If you want to see another awesome game in this line that he played against Caruana, click here. Thanks for watching. See you soon.